I, 32M, stood in the hallway of my own house at 11:47 p.m. the night before my wedding and listened to my fiancée Cheryl, 30F, and her sister Caroline, 34F, map out how they were going to dismantle my life. I want to be clear about something before I get into this. I didn't stumble into the kitchen for water and accidentally overhear a whisper. I was coming downstairs because Cheryl had been on the phone with Caroline for over an hour, and I figured they were doing some last-minute wedding planning, and I wanted to ask if they needed anything. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs because I heard my name, and what followed was the most detailed, rehearsed conversation I've ever heard two people have about destroying someone. Cheryl was telling Caroline the timeline. After the honeymoon, she'd start pushing to get added to the title on the house. My house. The one I bought 3 years before I even met her. She talked about it like she was reading from a checklist. Get on the title, wait 6 months. Start building a case that the marriage was falling apart. Caroline kept feeding her specifics. Things like making sure she had text messages showing she tried to fix the marriage, that I was the one who was emotionally unavailable. They talked about how easy it would be because, and this is the part that I will never forget as long as I live, Cheryl said I loved her so much I'd never see it coming. Caroline laughed and told her not to forget about the house to make sure I ended up watching her move on in it. Some background. I met Cheryl through Omar, 33M, who was supposed to be my best friend since college. Omar had been dating Caroline on and off for years, and he introduced me to Cheryl at a barbecue at his place back in 2021. Cheryl was charming, funny, seemed genuinely interested in who I was. We moved fast. She moved into my place after 8 months, I proposed after 18. Looking back, I know exactly why she targeted me. I'd just closed on the house. Omar knew my financial situation because we'd been close for over a decade. He knew what I made, knew I had no debt, knew I'd just put a massive down payment on a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that was appreciating fast. Omar told Caroline, Caroline told Cheryl, and suddenly this woman who supposedly just happened to be at that barbecue was very interested in the quiet guy with the new house. I stood in that hallway for almost 4 minutes. They covered the house. They covered how Cheryl would position herself as the victim when the split happened. And Caroline even brought up how Omar could back her story if it ever got ugly because Omar would say whatever Caroline told him to. That was the part that really got to me. Not just Cheryl, but Omar. My supposed best friend was part of this. He'd set me up. The introduction wasn't casual. It was calculated. Omar had been doing whatever Caroline wanted since the day he met her. And introducing me to Cheryl was just another item on her list. I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed for about 20 minutes, and I made a decision. I was not going to say a single word. Not that night, not the next morning, not at the altar. I was going to marry her, and then I was going to take everything from every single one of them. The wedding happened the next day, a Thursday afternoon at a venue outside the city. Small ceremony, 60 people. Omar was my best man. Caroline was Cheryl's maid of honor. I smiled through every photo. Cheryl kept squeezing my hand during the vows, and I squeezed back. We did our first dance to some song she'd picked, and I kept the same expression the entire time. I want to be honest. It wasn't hard to pretend. I wasn't sad. I was already planning. We went to Cancun for the honeymoon, 5 days. Cheryl was affectionate, talkative, kept making jokes about our future. I played along. But I spent every night after she fell asleep going through my phone, researching property law in our state, prenuptial versus postnuptial protections, what rights a spouse has to a home purchased before marriage. I started texting my cousin Blake, 29M, who works in real estate, asking him hypotheticals. Blake didn't know the full picture yet, but he knew something was wrong because I was asking very specific questions about title transfers and spousal claims on property owned prior to marriage. We got back on a Wednesday. By Friday, I had an appointment with an attorney, not a divorce attorney, a property attorney. I needed to understand exactly what Cheryl could and couldn't touch. The answer was more complicated than I wanted. In our state, if she could prove she contributed to the mortgage, to renovations, to maintaining the property, she could potentially claim a share. And Cheryl had been smart about this. She'd been paying a portion of the utilities since she moved in. She'd paid for a bathroom remodel out of a joint account we'd set up for household expenses. That was when I realized this wasn't going to be a quick fight. Cheryl and Caroline hadn't been sloppy. They'd been building this for over a year. Cheryl had receipts, she had contributions, and she had a plan that would look completely legitimate to any judge. I wasn't dealing with someone impulsive. I was dealing with someone methodical. So I had to be more methodical. I told the property attorney everything I'd overheard. He connected me with a family law attorney named Brittany, 41F, and she laid out reality for me. What I'd heard that night by itself wasn't enough. I needed a pattern. I needed documentation of intent. I needed Cheryl to keep talking, keep planning, keep thinking she was in control while I built a case that would make it impossible for her to take anything. That's where the 2 months started. And if you think hearing what I heard was the worst part, buckle up. Because what I found out during those 2 months made the night before the wedding look like the opening act. Okay, so this man is standing in the hallway of his own house. The night before, he's supposed to be starting the rest of his life, and he's listening to the entire blueprint of his financial destruction being read out loud, like a corporate earnings call. These two had quarterly goals. They had KPIs. Cheryl was running a whole project management board on how to steal this man's house, and Caroline was in there like a senior consultant, making sure the deliverables were on track. And Omar, this dude sat across from him at college, probably borrowed his notes, ate at his table for a decade, and his contribution to the friendship was scouting him like a mark for a con. That's not a best friend. That's a sleeper agent who got activated the moment this man closed on a 3-bedroom. But honestly, what gets me is the composure. Because most people hear that conversation and they're kicking that door open at 11:48. This guy went back upstairs, sat on the edge of his bed like a man loading a save file, and decided to speedrun the entire destruction of everyone who wronged him on his wedding eve. The level of restraint it takes to walk down that aisle the next day, squeeze her hand during vows, slow dance to her song, all while your brain is running a legal strategy in the background. That's not a regular human response. That's a man who understood that revenge isn't about the explosion, it's about the architecture. And I genuinely respect it and am slightly terrified by it in equal measure. Update 1. All right, I'm back. A lot of you told me to just file for annulment and get out. I get it. But an annulment wouldn't have cost them anything. Cheryl walks away clean. Caroline moves to the next scheme. Omar keeps being Omar. That was not acceptable. I needed them to feel what I felt in that hallway. So here's what happened during those 2 months. Week 1, after the honeymoon, I closed the joint household account. Told Cheryl the bank was offering better rates on a different account type. She didn't question it because her plan was to wait 6 months before making moves on the title. She thought she was on schedule. She had no idea I was already ahead of her. Brittany told me the most important thing was getting Cheryl to put her intentions in writing. Text, message, anything. Cheryl and Caroline texted constantly on WhatsApp. Hundreds of messages a day. Cheryl's phone was always buzzing and she'd tilt the screen away from me every time. Before the wedding, I thought she was being private. Now I knew what those conversations were about, but I couldn't grab her phone. Face ID never left it unlocked, so I went through Omar. 3 weeks after the wedding, he invited me to watch a game at his apartment. Normal for us. I started talking about the house, mentioned Cheryl had been asking about getting on the title. Omar got quiet, then told me it was probably a good idea, that married couples should share everything. He was coaching me, sitting across from me, eating wings I paid for, telling me to hand my house over to the woman he helped set me up with. But here's what Omar didn't expect. I mentioned Blake had been looking into property stuff for me. Omar's energy shifted immediately. He wanted to know what Blake was researching, why I was talking to Blake instead of just doing it. He was nervous. He texted Caroline that night. I know because Caroline texted Cheryl and Cheryl brought it up over breakfast. She asked why I'd been talking to Blake about house stuff, said she thought we'd handle finances together. I told her Blake was just helping with paperwork and she dropped it, but she was rattled. The relay chain was confirmed. Omar to Caroline to Cheryl. Instant. Now here's the part that changed everything. Blake had been doing title searches on my property as part of the research I'd asked for, and he found something. Cheryl had already contacted the county recorder's office. Before the wedding, she'd requested forms for adding a spouse to an existing deed. The inquiry was dated 2 months before our wedding day. She was filing paperwork to get on my title before she even had a ring on her finger. Brittany said this established premeditation. We weren't just protecting the house anymore. We were building a case for annulment based on fraud. If I could prove the marriage was entered under false pretenses, with one party intending to acquire assets through deception, the court could void the entire thing. Not a divorce, a voiding. But the county inquiry alone wasn't enough. Cheryl could claim she was just being proactive. I needed more. So I started feeding Omar false information. Told him I was thinking about adding Cheryl to the deed as a 6-month anniversary surprise. Omar was practically giddy. Within 48 hours, Caroline had relayed it to Cheryl. Cheryl became more affectionate, started talking about renovations, long-term plans, raising kids in that house. She was accelerating because she thought I was about to hand her everything. Then I brought up the postnup. Brittany had drafted one with a clause about the house, worded so Cheryl would either sign it and limit her claim, or refuse and reveal her interest in the property was bigger than she'd let on. Either way, I had her. Saturday morning, I framed it as something Brittany recommended for both our protection. Cheryl's reaction was immediate. She wanted to know why I'd hired a family attorney without telling her. We went back and forth for almost 2 hours. She kept saying postnups are what people do when they're planning to leave, that I was treating our marriage like a business transaction. I told her it was standard. She pushed back, then said she needed to talk to Caroline about it. Not a lawyer, not a friend, Caroline. The woman who sat in my kitchen mapping out how to take my house? I didn't react, just said sure, take your time. But I wrote down every deflection, every reason she gave for refusing. Because Brittany told me a refusal to sign a reasonable postnup, combined with the pre-wedding title, inquiry and the behavioral pattern, would build the fraud case. Then Omar made his move, came to my house the following week without Cheryl there, sat at the kitchen table and told me the postnup was a mistake, that Cheryl was upset, that Caroline was worried. Then he told me directly, if I really cared about Cheryl, I'd put her on the deed and forget the postnup. My best friend of 12 years telling me to give away my house? I asked him one question. Why did he care so much about what was on my deed? He didn't have an answer, stammered for about 10 seconds, said something about wanting his friends to be happy, changed the subject, but that moment confirmed it. Omar wasn't just Caroline's messenger. He was invested in this. And I was about to find out exactly why. This man is running counterintelligence operations out of his own marriage. He dropped Blake's name to Omar like bait on a fishing line and then timed how long it took to travel through the entire network back to his breakfast table. And it was overnight. That's not a family communication chain. That's a surveillance apparatus with a 12-hour turnaround time. Omar hears Blake at 8 p.m. Caroline processes it by midnight. Cheryl deploys it over eggs by 9 a.m. These people were running shifts, and the county recorder discovery, she was requesting deed forms 2 months before the wedding. Like she was so confident in the con that she was doing pre-production on the theft while still pretending to care about flower arrangements. That's a level of audacity that almost loops back around to impressive before you remember it's just sociopathy with good time management. But the postnup move was genuinely brilliant because it's a trap disguised as a reasonable request. Any normal spouse says, yeah, sure, let's protect each other. Cheryl's first instinct was to call her handler, not a lawyer, not a therapist, not even a friend. She called the woman running the operation, and Omar showing up solo to lobby against the postnup, sitting at the man's kitchen table telling him to give away his house. That takes a specific breed of shamelessness. Like Omar has looked this man in the eyes for 12 years, and somewhere in year 11 decided his friendship was worth less than free rent in a nice neighborhood. Update 2. So after the postnup conversation, Cheryl didn't speak to me for almost 3 days. Not in an angry way, in a calculating way. She was regrouping. I could tell because she was on her phone constantly, and every time I walked into a room she'd switch apps. On the third day, she came to me and said she'd thought about the postnup and she was willing to discuss it. But she wanted her own attorney to review it first. Brittany had predicted this. She told me to agree immediately and act relieved, because Cheryl hiring her own lawyer meant there would now be a formal negotiation on record. Every counterproposal Cheryl's attorney made would reveal what she actually wanted from the marriage. But here's where it got complicated. Cheryl didn't hire just any attorney, she hired someone Caroline found. And the attorney came back with a counter-proposal that was absolutely wild. Cheryl wanted the postnup to include a clause that if we divorced within the first 5 years, she'd be entitled to 50% of the home's equity appreciation from the date of marriage. Not 50% of the house, 50% of how much it went up in value, in a neighborhood that had appreciated almost 20% in 2 years. Brittany looked at that counter-proposal and told me this was the evidence we needed. No spouse negotiating in good faith asks for appreciation equity in a postnup unless they're already planning the exit. She filed it. Now, during all this, I still hadn't confronted Cheryl. I hadn't confronted Omar. I hadn't confronted Caroline. I was playing the concerned husband who just wanted to protect both of us, and it was eating me alive. But every time I wanted to snap, I'd think about that kitchen conversation and remind myself that patience was the only weapon that would actually work. Then Omar's real motive surfaced. I'd been wondering why Omar cared so much about my deed, why he pushed so hard for me to drop the postnup. Blake figured it out. Blake had been helping me track the property records, and he noticed something. Caroline's apartment lease was ending in 2 months, and she hadn't renewed. Omar's lease was ending around the same time. Neither of them had signed new leases anywhere. Blake asked me point blank if there was any chance Caroline and Omar were planning to move into my house. And the second he said it, everything clicked. The plan wasn't just Cheryl getting on the title. The plan was Cheryl getting on the title, then Caroline and Omar moving in as family, establishing residency, and effectively taking over a house I'd bought and paid for. 4 people on a property one person owned. That's why Omar was so invested. He wasn't just helping Caroline scheme, he was getting a house out of it too. I confirmed this the same way I'd confirmed everything else, through the relay chain. I told Omar that Cheryl and I had been talking about maybe having Caroline stay with us for a while since her lease was ending, just to help her out. Omar's reaction was instant enthusiasm. He started talking about how it made sense, how family should help family. And then he casually dropped that he and Caroline had actually been thinking about getting a place together and wouldn't it be great if they could just stay with us temporarily while they figured things out. Temporarily, right. 2 people who'd spent over a year scheming to get Cheryl on my deed were now angling to move into my house. I told Omar it sounded reasonable and I'd talk to Cheryl about it. I went straight to Brittany. She told me this was getting bigger than a simple annulment. If Caroline and Omar established residency in my home, removing them would require a formal eviction process even if they never paid rent. She advised me to accelerate the timeline. We'd been building the fraud case slowly, but now there was a deadline. If those leases expired and they showed up with suitcases, I'd be fighting on 2 fronts. Brittany filed the annulment petition that week, but she didn't serve Cheryl yet. She wanted one more thing, the WhatsApp messages. And I had a plan for that too. Cheryl had been pushing for a weekend away, just the 2 of us, to reconnect after the post-nup tension. I agreed. We booked a place about 3 hours upstate for the following weekend. My plan was simple. During the trip, with Cheryl relaxed and feeling like she'd won me back, I was going to bring up the house conversation in a way that got her talking on the record. Not secretly recording. Something better. I was going to get her to text Caroline about it while I could see her screen. Brittany told me that if I could testify to the content of messages I personally witnessed, that was admissible even without a screenshot. The trip happened on a Saturday. We drove up, checked into the rental, and I played the part all day. By Saturday night, Cheryl was relaxed, talking about the future. And I brought up the house. I told her I'd been thinking about dropping the post-nup entirely and just adding her to the deed. She was so eager to confirm this with Caroline that she grabbed her phone right there on the couch and started texting. I was sitting right next to her. I saw every word. She told Caroline it was happening, that I'd caved, that the post-nup was dead. Caroline's response was a string of celebration emojis, followed by a message telling Cheryl to get him to do it before he changes his mind, and then asking when they could start moving their stuff over. I memorized every word of that exchange, and the next morning, I told Brittany we were ready. The appreciation equity counter-proposal is the part that just sends me into orbit. Like Cheryl and Caroline sat down with an attorney and essentially submitted a formal legal document that said, when I leave this man, I want half the profit his neighborhood generated. They put the exit strategy in the post-nup. That's like a bank robber, handing the teller a business card before pulling out the bag. And the full scope of what they were planning? It wasn't even just about the house anymore. It was a whole colony. 4 adults absorbing one man's property, like some kind of financial amoeba. Omar and Caroline weren't even trying to be subtle about it. They just hadn't renewed their leases and were sitting there with countdown timers waiting to show up with IKEA furniture and audacity. And honestly, the weekend trip play was ice cold. This man drove 3 hours upstate, cooked dinner probably, talked about their future, said all the right words, waited for her guard to drop, and then dangled the deed like a string in front of a cat knowing exactly what she'd do. And Cheryl didn't even make it 30 seconds before she was texting Caroline the victory lap. She couldn't even enjoy the fake moment she was living in because the real relationship in her life was never with him. It was with that group chat. He was never the partner. He was the asset. And she just confirmed it on a couch in a rental cabin while he sat there memorizing every word like a human screenshot. Final update. Cheryl got served on a Tuesday at the house. I wasn't there. Brittany arranged a process server while I was at Blake's. Cheryl called me 14 times in 2 hours. When I came home, she was at the kitchen table with the annulment papers spread out and Caroline next to her. Both of them, at my table. Same spot where they'd planned everything. Cheryl started immediately. What was happening? What had she done? Why was I doing this without talking to her? I sat down and told her I knew. The plan, the title, the timeline, all of it. Cheryl played confused. What plan? Who's putting ideas in my head? Caroline sat there silent, which told me everything. Because Caroline always had something to say. I told Cheryl I'd heard them the night before the wedding. Every word. The bleeding dry. The house watching me move on in it. Cheryl's strategy shifted instantly. She stopped denying and started reframing. She said that was just venting. Sisters say horrible things when they're stressed about a wedding. She said she loved me. She'd never actually go through with it. The county recorder inquiry was just excitement about being married. We went back and forth for over an hour. Every fact I presented, she had a reframe. The post-nup counter-proposal demanding appreciation equity, her attorney's idea. The relay chain through Omar, just family communicating. Caroline wanting to move in, helping her sister during a tough time. Cheryl was good. She'd rehearsed for getting caught because every answer was smooth. Then I brought up Omar. Why he told me to drop the post-nup. Why his lease was ending the same month as Caroline's. Why he'd been feeding her information about Blake within hours. Cheryl went quiet and looked at Caroline. Caroline finally spoke. Told me I was reading too much into normal family stuff, that Omar was just a good friend, that I'd regret blowing up my marriage over paranoia. I told Caroline she could save it for the judge. The annulment petition included her and Omar as material witnesses to the fraud claim, both required to testify under oath. Lying under oath carries consequences no amount of reframing fixes. Caroline left within 10 minutes. Cheryl stayed and switched tactics. She got emotional, said she'd sign the post-nup right now, whatever terms, give up any claim to the house permanently if I'd withdraw the petition. I said no. She asked what I wanted. I told her the marriage voided, gone. She asked about counseling, and I told her there was nothing to rebuild because the marriage was never real. Court came 3 weeks later. Brittany presented everything methodically. The pre-wedding county recorder inquiry, the post-nup counter-proposal with the appreciation equity clause, my testimony about witnessing the WhatsApp messages on the weekend trip, Blake's testimony about title search findings and coordinated lease expirations, and the centerpiece, what I heard in the kitchen, corroborated by every pattern that followed. Cheryl's attorney argued the overheard conversation was private and out of context. The judge wasn't interested. The pattern was too clean. The inquiry before the wedding, the post-nup demands, the coordinated move-in, the relay chain. Every piece connected. Cheryl tried one last move on the stand, said she'd been insecure and was just protecting herself. The judge asked her directly why she'd inquired about adding herself to the deed 2 months before the wedding if she was simply insecure. No answer. Annulment granted. Marriage voided. No claim to the house, no claim to anything. She walked out with exactly what she brought in, which was nothing. Attorney fees came out of her own pocket because the court found she'd entered the marriage in bad faith. Omar and Caroline had been subpoenaed and neither showed. Brittany filed contempt. Court issued bench warrants. They eventually appeared for a deposition where Brittany questioned them for 3 hours. Under oath, Omar admitted Caroline had asked him to introduce me to Cheryl specifically because he'd told her about my house. He tried framing it as matchmaking, but Brittany walked him through every lie, every relay, every push toward the deed. By the end, he was contradicting himself constantly. I filed a civil suit against all three. Tortious interference and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The fraud annulment ruling made the civil case strong because the scheme was already established on court record. That suit is still pending. Cheryl is living with her parents. Caroline and Omar's relationship collapsed under deposition pressure. Turns out when two people build everything on scheming together, the second it fails, they turn on each other. Cheryl told her sister I'd never see it coming. She was right about one thing, someone in that marriage never saw it coming. It just wasn't me. The confrontation at the kitchen table is poetry. Same table, same chairs, same room where this whole thing was born, and now she's sitting there with annulment papers instead of a checklist. And Cheryl's performance during that confrontation tells you everything about who she actually is. She didn't break down, she didn't confess, she pivoted. Every single fact got a spin. The county recorder forms were excitement. The relay chain was family communication. The appreciation equity grab was her attorney going rogue. She had a prepared defense for getting caught, which means somewhere in that year-long scheme, she and Caroline sat down and said, "Okay, but what if he finds out?" and workshopped responses. That's not a wife, that's a defendant who started pretrial prep before the crime was finished. And Caroline going silent during the confrontation after being the loudest voice in every room for the entire story. That silence was the sound of someone realizing the game was over and the exit was gone. The second she heard material witness and under oath, she was out that door so fast she probably left a cartoon dust cloud. And Omar. Omar folding under deposition and admitting the introduction was calculated. That's 12 years of friendship officially reclassified as a setup. Every barbecue, every game night, every time this man thought he had a brother, it was just a long con waiting for the right moment to deploy. And the fact that Omar and Caroline turned on each other, the instant pressure, hit proves what everyone should already know. People who conspire together don't have loyalty. They have shared interests. And the second those interests diverge, they'll eat each other alive in a conference room.